thought Emily was just pulling away. She'd grown distant over the last few weeks. Fewer late-night chats, more excuses about deadlines at work, or stuff she had to handle. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and I trusted her completely. When she started spending entire evenings buried in her phone, I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was juggling extra shifts at Madison & Co., or maybe she was just tired from her Sunday volunteer gig at the community center. I never imagined the truth, and I certainly never expected that her own father would be the one to shatter my sleep-fogged peace. It was just past 2 a.m. when my phone lit up. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Michael Carter on the caller ID, Emily's dad. He'd always been cordial, the kind of guy who brought over homemade apple pie for Thanksgiving and cracked corny jokes at birthday barbecues. I answered, bleary and half asleep. At first, he sounded like every other concerned parent. "Hey, Matt, sorry for the late call. I know you two have plans this weekend and I just wanted to check in." His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. Unease, maybe guilt. Then he paused, and I felt my chest tighten. "Matt," he said, in that soft but serious tone that immediately put me on edge. "I've seen things. I've heard things. I don't like to pry, you know that, but I think you deserve to know what's going on." My confusion must have been obvious, because he sighed. "You're Emily. She's been seeing someone else. I've seen her texting him late at night. I've heard her make plans to sneak out. I didn't want to believe it myself." My stomach dropped. I felt like the floor had been yanked out from under me. "I'm so sorry, son," he added quietly. "I hate that I have to tell you this, but I couldn't stand by and let you be left in the dark." I hung up before he finished. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone clutched in one hand, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? Who was he? Why hadn't she told me? I replayed our last conversation, her voice tired, her eyes too bright, that forced laugh. All the moments I'd brushed off suddenly felt like alarms I'd ignored. I tried calling Emily, but it went straight to voicemail. I stared at her unread messages, some work-related texts I'd seen before, a string of selfies on Instagram, but nothing that made sense now. By sunrise, I decided I needed proof. I drove to the coffee shop where Emily said she'd be until noon. I saw her car parked in the lot, but the second I pushed open the door, that warm, familiar smell of roasted beans felt like a betrayal. She was there, at a corner table, feet tucked under her skirt, phone glued to her ear. She laughed, a soft, intimate chuckle that made my breath catch. The guy on the other end, I couldn't see his face, but just hearing her tone was enough. My hands trembled. I snapped a picture, my finger hovering over the screen until I convinced myself I was insane, that maybe this was a business call. But then she slid the phone into her purse and turned to smile at the barista with a look I'd only ever given her. I left without confronting her. On the drive home, I wrestled with what to do. I wanted to call Michael back and beg him to retract his words, to insist it was a misunderstanding. But a tiny voice inside me said, what if he was right? I'd stayed late at my own job all week, trusting Emily to be honest with me. Now all that trust felt like sand slipping through my fingers. When I got back to my apartment, I paced the living room, replaying every inside joke, every whispered confession, every "I love you" she'd ever said. None of it felt real anymore. My phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Can we talk tonight? I miss you." I stared at the message, my brain screaming caution. I knew what was coming next, but I also knew I had to hear it from her. I typed back, "Yeah, let's meet at our spot in the park at 7. Then I deleted it and typed again, "Sure, I'll be there." My heart pounded so loud I thought the neighbors might hear. By the time evening arrived, a storm was rolling in, heavy clouds casting the park in a dusky light. Emily was already there when I walked in, a navy trench coat pulled tight around her, eyes rimmed with something. Shame? Fear? I saw the tremor in her hands as she tucked a stray hair behind her ear. We sat on our old bench, the one we'd carved our initials into by the lake. She waited for me to speak. I took a deep breath. "Michael called me," I said softly. "He told me you've been seeing someone else." She looked away, closing her eyes as if bracing herself. The wind picked up, scattering petals from the nearby cherry blossoms. It felt like every moment of calm shattered around us. I don't know which came first, her confession or the tears. But as she spoke, admitting everything, I realized that this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about lies carefully woven into the fabric of our relationship. And though my heart was breaking, I felt a strange relief that the truth was finally out in the open. I didn't speak for a long moment, just watched the petals swirl in the wind, carried away like the fragments of what I thought was us. Finally, I looked back at her. Emily's eyes were glazed, as if she'd already cried herself empty. "Why?" I whispered, though I barely expected an answer. She exhaled, voice soft and ragged. "Because I lost myself somewhere, Matt. I stopped feeling like I belonged in our story." That admission stung sharper than any betrayal. Underneath it lay 1,000 questions about honesty, about love, about how two people could build everything together and still wake up one morning strangers. I wanted to scream, to demand exact details. Who he was, how long it had been going on, if it was just a fling or something deeper. But I'd already crossed that line the moment I agreed to meet her here. So instead I nodded, letting the silence stretch between us like an accusation. She stood up first, brushing stray bits of hair from her face. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you." I wanted to believe her, or at least pretend. But years of late-night talks and weekend getaways flashed through my mind. Every promise of always felt cheap now. The park bench seemed too small to hold all the weight of our history. I got to my feet too, and she looked at me like she expected me to wrap her in my arms, to forgive and forget. But there was nothing left but ash. "I need time," I said, turning away. The words were clumsy, stilted, hardly the poetic apology she must have rehearsed. She reached for my arm, but I shrugged free. She watched me walk toward the path, shoulders hunched, and I glanced back once. Her eyes glistened with tears I'd caused. I tried to keep my face calm, but inside I felt like I was splintering. The drive home was a blur of city lights and red taillights. I flicked through playlists we used to jam out to on road trips. Every song now felt like a needle scratching a record. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a while, engine idling, mind swirling. I thought of Michael's words, "I don't want to see you hurt in the dark." In that moment, I was grateful for the intrusion. Better to know than to stay shattered by lies. Inside, the apartment echoed with absence. Her coffee mug still sat on the kitchen island. I'd habitually left half of mine in the sink. I rinsed them both, stacked them neatly, as though that small act could restore order. I found her phone on the couch, face down, notifications blinking. I grabbed it, scrolling through messages she'd never sent me. Screenshots of plans with him, selfies they'd snapped together, even a grocery list where she'd scribbled his name next to "buy wine." Anger and sorrow tangled in my chest, hot and cold at the same time. I closed the phone and set it on the table, making a silent promise. I wouldn't become the version of myself who stalked her digital trail. I'd face the truth head-on, without letting it consume me. That night, I called my friend Jenna. She'd been my rock since college. She answered on the second ring, surprised to hear me so late. "I need you," I blurted. In her calm, practical voice, she reminded me to breathe, to eat something, to remember that this didn't define me. She stayed on the line until I felt steady enough to sleep. Even as I drifted off, I heard her say, "We'll get through this, I promise." Morning light felt like a betrayal, too bright, too hopeful. But I forced myself up, showered, and went for a run along the river path. Each step pounded out frustration. Every breath reminded me I was still breathing. By the time I returned home, muscles aching, I felt something I hadn't felt yesterday, the faintest glimmer of possibility. This wasn't the end of my story, just a devastating chapter. Over the next few days, I kept it simple. Work, gym, cook a decent meal instead of ordering takeout. I packed away all the tokens of us, the framed photo from our beach trip, the playlist she'd made for my birthday. It hurt more to box them up than I expected. But as I sealed each lid, I felt a small release, like I was reclaiming little pieces of myself. Then I got a text from Michael. "Can I come by?" it read. His timing was impeccable. He'd become an unlikely ally. I invited him over that evening. When he arrived, he was carrying a 6-pack of beer and that same easy smile. We sat on my balcony, overlooking the city lights. He didn't pry or patronize. Instead, he toasted to new beginnings and handed me a beer. "It shouldn't have been my place," he said quietly. "But sometimes honesty comes from where you least expect it." I nodded. For the first time, I truly understood what he meant. Truth isn't always easy, but it's the only foundation worth building on. As we talked into the night, about work, about family, about football, I realized I was ready to let go of what we had, to open myself to whatever came next. And though it felt like stepping off a cliff, I also knew I wouldn't fall forever. Eventually, I'd land. I didn't expect closure to come from sitting across a beer-littered balcony table with the man who'd inadvertently saved me from oblivious heartbreak. But talking with Michael that night did something to my chest. It unclenched a bit. He asked about my childhood, my dreams before Emily, and I found myself laughing at memories I hadn't revisited in years. In the soft city glow, the pain of betrayal felt distant, like a receding wave. The next morning, I decided to confront the other man. It wasn't about revenge. I just needed to understand who he was, to hear his side, even if what he said only confirmed my worst suspicions. His name was Jason Turner. He worked at a boutique ad agency downtown, apparently charming enough to make her feel special. I looked up his LinkedIn and saw his LinkedIn sanitized grin, his polished endorsements for strategy and leadership. It galled me. Every skill he touted was the one she'd said I lacked. Too predictable, she'd told me once. Not spontaneous enough. I texted Jason, "We need to talk. Me, you, coffee." His reply was almost immediate. "Sure, is tomorrow morning at Bean Tree okay?" I agreed, my throat tight. The next day I walked into the same cafe where I'd caught her in that stolen moment on the phone. Jason stood when I sat down, offered a stiff handshake. His eyes flicked with that scripted apology you see in movies, genuine regret laced with arrogance. "I'm sorry," he began. "I honestly didn't know she was in a relationship." He claimed ignorance, said he thought they were just hanging out. My gut said otherwise, those late-night messages, those intimate selfies Michael had mentioned. But I let him finish. "Look, I never meant to hurt you. I thought she was single, and when I realized, it was too late." I stared at his coffee cup, swirling the dark liquid like it held all the answers. I realized I didn't need him to feel remorse. His guilt couldn't erase the nights I'd spent alone, waiting for her. When I finally looked up, I felt a calm I hadn't known since the call with her father. "I appreciate that," I said, "but it's not about you." I laid out what I needed. No more contact with Emily, no more lies. He nodded, pale. Agreed. That handshake this time felt different, less confrontational, more a pact to move on. Walking home, I felt lighter. The city air, tinged with the scent of morning blooms, seemed to welcome me. I replayed the confrontation in my mind and realized I'd done exactly what I needed. I'd reclaimed my own narrative. Betrayal wasn't going to define me. I chose to define myself. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding. I signed up for art classes I'd always wanted to try, picked up my guitar again, and volunteered at the community center where Emily used to spend Sundays. It felt odd at first. Every familiar corner of my life reminded me of her. But with each brushstroke, each chord, each conversation with the kids, I felt pieces of myself returning. One Saturday afternoon, I joined a group painting session in a light-filled studio downtown. There, I met Ava, a graphic designer with a contagious laugh and paint-splattered jeans. She teased me when I agonized over mixing the perfect shade of lavender, and I found myself flirting without self-doubt. When she asked to see my work, I showed her my canvas, a half-finished city skyline under a twilight sky. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You need more stars," she said. "It's too lonely." I laughed, the kind of deep laugh that surprises you. "Fair point," I told her. Her smile felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. After that class, we grabbed smoothies and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Why she loved vinyl records, my obsession with midnight drives, the movies that made us cry. I realized I hadn't felt this alive in months. Ava didn't know my story, and I wasn't in a hurry to tell her. For the first time, I wanted to unfold gradually, without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. That night, I texted Michael to thank him again, for telling me the truth, for being there when Emily wouldn't. He replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji and an invitation. "Barbecue at ours this Sunday. Jenna's coming too." Jenna, my steadfast friend, always knew the right thing to say. I smiled at the message. Sundays used to be our us days, but this time I felt ready to fill them with new faces and fresh laughter. On the way to Michael's, I paused at a crosswalk and looked back at my apartment building. No more boxes of mementos stacked outside, no more her perfume lingering in the hallway. I felt at peace. The ache of betrayal had eased, replaced by a quiet excitement for what lay ahead. I stepped into Michael's backyard, greeted by the smell of grilling burgers and the hum of friendly conversation. Jenna waved, and Ava, smiling broadly, waved back. In that moment, I realized I was exactly where I needed to be, surrounded by people who truly saw me, who valued honesty, who could share a laugh without hidden agendas. And as I grabbed a plate and sank into a chair under the warm May sun, I felt ready to write the next chapter, one that wasn't defined by someone else's deceit, but by my own resilience and capacity to love again. The laughter around Michael's backyard table felt genuine. No forced smiles, no clipped pleasantries, just easy conversation and the tang of barbecue sauce in the air. Jenna and Michael caught up about his daughter's college plans, and Ava animatedly described her latest design project. I watched them for a moment, feeling like an observer in someone else's life rather than fully present in my own. But then, Ava caught my eye across the table and winked, as if inviting me back into the conversation. I smiled, raised my beer in acknowledgement, and leaned in to share a memory with Jenna about our disastrous road trip in senior year. The sound of my own laughter was startling. It reminded me that I was learning to inhabit my body again, to feel without the weight of betrayal dragging at my limbs. Later that evening, after the sun dipped behind the fence line and lanterns flickered on, Ava and I found ourselves alone clearing plates. The chill in the air made me pull my jacket tighter, and I realized how comfortable her presence had become. It wasn't fireworks or relentless intensity, it was a slow thaw. "You know," she said, pausing as she scrubbed a plate, "I never got to ask, what made you take up painting again?" I rinsed my brush and looked at her in the lantern light. "Emily," I said with a small grin. "I thought I'd lost everything, my girlfriend, my trust in people, my sense of who I was. But I figured if I could pick up a brush again, I could pick up the pieces too." She nodded, and somehow in that simple exchange there was an unspoken pact. We were both here to rebuild at our own pace. Over the next few weeks, our friendship unfolded into something tender. We met for coffee on lazy Sunday mornings, wandered through art supply aisles comparing our favorite brushes, and shared playlists on long drive nights. She introduced me to her favorite vinyl shop downtown, where the owner let us play old records in a back room lit by a single Edison bulb. We danced barefoot on the wooden floorboards to Nina Simone, and for a moment I forgot all about broken trust and betrayal. I was just Matt again, grinning like a kid. Yet even as warmth returned, shadows lingered. I caught myself bristling when my phone buzzed with a random unknown number, or recoiling when someone mentioned trust issues in conversation. Some nights, I'd lie awake, heart racing, convinced it was Emily texting, ready to explain, to beg forgiveness. I'd reach for my phone and then lock my screen again, willing myself to let it go. There were days when I wondered if opening my heart again was foolhardy, if I'd just end up shattered all over again. But every time doubt crept in, Ava's voice would surface. "You deserve to feel safe." That mantra became my anchor. One Wednesday evening, Jenna called me out of the blue. "Your dad's coming to town next week," she said, her voice bright. "He wants to finally meet the woman who's been filling our group chats with paint emojis." My pulse fluttered at the thought of Dad's arrival. I hadn't spoken to him much since the breakup, partly because I was embarrassed, partly because I wasn't ready to answer his questions about how I was doing. But I also wanted him to meet Ava, to see that I wasn't just surviving anymore, but actually happy. "Let's do it," I said. "I'll take Friday off." Friday arrived with crisp spring air and a sky the color of washed denim. We picked up Dad at the airport, and I watched nervously as his taxi pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, tall, with that same easy smile he'd always worn when he taught me how to ride a bike or coached my little league team. He wrapped me in a bear hug. "Look at you, buddy," he said. "I've been following your art online. I'm proud of you." Then he turned to Ava and offered his hand. "I'm Peter. Your dad tells me you're dangerous with a paintbrush." Ava laughed, and suddenly I saw how easy it was for my family and friends to welcome her. Over tacos at our favorite spot, where the guacamole was always free and the margaritas tasted like summer, Dad asked her about her design career. teased her about my newfound paint obsession, and told stories about my awful attempts at cooking as a kid. I watched them, a sense of peace unfurling inside me. I realized that rebuilding trust didn't mean erasing the past. It meant surrounding yourself with people who chose you, time and time again. As night deepened, Dad and I stepped outside to the little front porch. He handed me a beer and studied me. "I know you've been through hell," he said quietly. "But look at you now." He paused, glancing back toward the open door where Ava and Jenna were laughing over a photo on Jenna's phone. "Don't let fear keep you from living, son. You've earned the right to be happy." I raised my bottle to him. "To new beginnings," I said. He clinked bottles with me. "To new beginnings," he echoed. Under the soft glow of the porch light, I felt a surge of gratitude. For a father who told me the truth, for friends who stayed, for a woman who reminded me how to trust. And as the night air settled around us, I knew the story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one where betrayal would live in the past and hope would guide every brushstroke I made. Over the weeks that followed that warm spring evening, life settled into a new rhythm, one colored by paint and possibility rather than the dull gray of betrayal. Ava and I fell into an easy companionship. Lazy Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, buying fresh berries we'd turn into jam, impromptu evening walks along the river, talking about everything from our childhood embarrassments to our wildest daydreams. Each moment felt stitched together with honesty, as though we were weaving a tapestry untethered from past hurts. One afternoon, I found myself back in the old studio where I'd first picked up a brush again. The walls were lined with canvases, some finished, some in progress, and for the first time, I recognized the studio as my sanctuary, rather than a mausoleum of memories I couldn't bear to revisit. I painted a wide, sweeping sky, streaks of gold and pink mingling above a silhouette of our city skyline. With every brushstroke, I felt lighter, as though I was painting my way back to myself. Ava came by that evening, curious to see what I'd been working on. She stood beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, and said quietly, "It's beautiful, Matt. You've captured the feeling of sunrise, the promise of a new day." I smiled, and for the first time, I truly believed it. But even as joy returned, the ghost of Emily lingered at the edges of my mind. One sunny Saturday, I ran into her at a local coffee stand. I was there early, headphones in, tuning out everything except the thrum of my own breath when I felt someone tap my shoulder. I took out an earbud and saw her there. Same soft brown eyes, same delicate features, but framed by a nervous awkwardness I'd never seen before. I froze, memories flooding back. The way she'd laughed, the warmth of her hand in mine, the cruelty of her lies. "Matt," she said, voice trembling. I nodded, unsure whether to hug her or hold my ground. "Hey," I managed, my tone guarded but not unkind. "What's up?" "I'm sorry," she began, glancing down at her coffee cup. "I've been wanting to reach out, not to get anything back, just to say I'm sorry, for everything." Her eyes glistened in the morning light. "I was a coward. I lied because I was afraid of what we were becoming, of where I was going. It's no excuse, but I wanted you to know I regret it every day." I took a breath, feeling the familiar sting of old wounds, but I also felt something new, a capacity to hear her apology without it consuming me. I realized I didn't hate her anymore. I simply cared that she understood the depth of what she'd broken. "Thank you," I said softly. "I appreciate you saying that. I hope you find what you were looking for." She smiled, a small, tentative curve of her lips. "I hope the same for you." Then she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the clatter of the coffee stand behind me. Walking home, I felt an unexpected calm. I'd faced the final remnant of my past and found it no longer held power over me. I reached into my pocket and saw my phone light up, a message from Ava. "Hope you got that latte I ordered for you. Can't wait to see you tonight." I grinned, nearly stumbling over a cracked sidewalk. The future was calling, and I was ready to answer. That evening, we met at her apartment, a cozy loft with exposed brick walls and a record player spinning Ella Fitzgerald. We cooked dinner together, playful and relaxed, chopping vegetables and dancing around the kitchen. Over pasta and red wine, she asked if I'd ever shown my latest painting to anyone else. I shook my head. "I've been nervous," I admitted, "but I think I'm ready to put it out there." The next weekend, we attended a small gallery show. My painting hung alongside other works, abstract landscapes, portraits, bold color experiments. I stood in front of my canvas, heart pounding as strangers drifted in and out of the gallery, pausing to study my sunrise skyline. Some offered polite nods, others murmured compliments. One woman, an art blogger I'd admired online, stopped and said, "This one speaks to me." It's hopeful in a way art often forgets to be. I exchanged contact info, exhilarated. Ava squeezed my hand in the throng of admirers. "See, you did it," she whispered. "You found your voice again." In the weeks that followed, I felt momentum building. I sold that first painting, then another, and eventually booked a solo show of my own. Through it all, Ava was by my side, hanging the canvases in the gallery, celebrating each sale, keeping the champagne chilled. I introduced her to every buyer, every curious onlooker, and watched her beam with pride as if I were her masterpiece. One crisp evening after the final show, we walked home beneath a sky awash with stars. We paused at the foot of my stoop, and I pulled her close. "Thank you," I said, voice catching. "For everything, for trusting me, for believing in me." She tilted her head, looking up at me with a soft smile. "You did it all yourself," she replied. "I just held your brush." I laughed and kissed her, the cool night air swirling around us like a gentle benediction. In that moment, I felt the full arc of my journey, from the shattering blow of betrayal to the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust and hope. It had taken months to heal, but every step had been worth it. And though I could never have predicted the exact contours of my path, how deeply I'd be wounded, how fiercely I'd learn to love again, I was certain of one thing. I would carry this new story with me, brush in hand, ready to paint whatever sunrise came next. In the weeks after that gallery opening, life felt like a soft blur of color and possibility. Mornings began with sunbeams streaming through my bedroom window, illuminating canvases that lined my walls like silent witnesses to my journey. I'd wake before my alarm, sometimes from excitement, sometimes from sheer habit, and head to the studio with a cup of black coffee in hand. There I'd set up my easel, the scent of fresh acrylics mingling with dawn's crisp air, and lose myself in the slow rhythm of painting. Ava became my constant companion in that ritual. She'd slip in quietly, sometimes still in pajamas, and pour herself a mug of tea. We'd work side by side, me on my new Skyline series, her sketching logos for a freelance client, exchanging glances of encouragement, sharing half-joke critiques. There was something profoundly intimate about creating together, about watching someone you care about inhabit the same creative space and knowing you had their unguarded trust. One rainy afternoon, as droplets traced rivulets down the studio window, Ava paused mid-brushstroke and set her palette aside. "I've been thinking," she said, voice soft, "about us, about what's next." My heart gave a little leap. Though our relationship felt new in many ways, I also sensed the current pull toward deeper commitment. "Me too," I admitted, placing my brush in a jar of water. "Every day I feel more sure of you, and of who I am with you." She reached out and took my hand. "Then let's do something crazy," she whispered, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Let's take a trip. No work, no obligations, just us, art supplies in tow, somewhere neither of us has been." The idea was daring and liberating. My mind raced through possibilities. The wildflower fields of Montana, the terracotta rooftops of Tuscany, the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. Finally, I settled on a place neither of us had ever been, but both had dreamed of: New Mexico, the land of sun-baked mesas and endless skies. We booked our tickets that night. The next morning, the announcement on my phone, flight confirmation, rental car details, felt like an electric promise. I spent days planning, mapping out scenic pit stops, researching local galleries, assembling our art kits. Every step felt like weaving a new thread into our shared tapestry. When departure day arrived, I drove us to the airport in the humming chill of pre-dawn. Ava slept in the passenger seat, curls tumbling over her shoulder, and for a moment I held my breath at how beautiful she looked at rest. I roused her with a gentle shake, and she blinked awake, smiling groggily as she realized where we were. "Adventure awaits," I teased, and she laughed, a sound richer than any bell. New Mexico unfolded before us like a watercolor dream. We rented a bright turquoise Airstream trailer, parked it under a canopy of cottonwood trees, and spent 2 weeks exploring. Each morning, we watched the sunrise over red rock canyons, painting with broad brushes on watercolor pads, Earthy ochres, dusty roses, deep purples. We hiked through slot canyons, our boots crunching over sun-bleached pebbles, pausing to capture the way light danced off sandstone walls. Nights were spent by campfires, roasting s'mores and comparing brush techniques under a sky littered with stars no city could ever reveal. On our last evening, we set up our easels side by side on a bluff overlooking the Rio Grande. The sky stretched out in a riot of pink and violet, the river below winding like liquid silver. I turned to her, brush poised, and said, "I know I've come back from darkness, but being here with you, I realize I never want to lose sight of this, of us." She dipped her brush in lavender paint and drew a gentle curve on her canvas before meeting my gaze. "Then let's promise," she whispered, "to always paint our own story together, no matter what comes next." We sealed that promise with a kiss as the last light faded. In that moment, I understood something fundamental. Love, like art, isn't about perfection or predictability. It's about resilience, about rebuilding with new colors when the old ones have been shattered. It's about showing up, brush in hand, ready to create something beautiful from the fragments of the past. When we returned home, the walls of the studio were already waiting for our next series. We rolled out fresh canvases and placed them side by side, two blank fields, full of promise. And as I mixed my palette, I realized I'd never felt so ready to meet whatever sunrise lay ahead. Because this time, I wasn't painting alone. I had someone by my side whose hand I could trust, whose laughter still sent excitement coursing through my veins. Together, we would paint a future brighter and more honest than anything I'd dared imagine before.